On this episode of Jerks Talk Games, we sit on a tram for like 3 minutes. Why did anybody think this was a good opening? Welcome to Jerks Talk Games, a podcast where two programmers talk about video games and other things that they love. My name is Chris Tankersley, and with me, as always, is my good friend, Gary Hockin.
Hello, Chris, and may I say congratulations on becoming a Twitch affiliate streamer.
I know.
That's a pretty impressive accomplishment, my friend.
I know. All of those long hours of talking into the void with nobody watching has finally paid off.
Yeah, I'm pleased to become your first subscriber. Yes, I'm delighted for you, my friend.
I will gladly accept your money. That's all I'm going to say.
Shut up and take my money. Yeah.
What's really stupid about this is all of the stuff I've played up through trying to get this done. I get the most success out of Dwarf Fortress. You know, this old ASCII game, but it's such a niche thing.
Yeah.
Lots of people watch
agree.
it. Yeah.
I mean, everybody's playing, Blackout at the moment is big,
Yep.
Fortnite, everybody's playing those games. So I think I personally enjoy watching Blackout. I don't like Fortnite, but I also like watching weirder games, personally. So it's all good, my friend. Yeah, I think I can imagine why that's worked for you. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, so far we've had quite a few good streams. We just lost to Fort last night. But so actually that leads very nicely into games we've been playing lately. So I've been playing a lot of that, and obviously Fallout 76, which we talked about on the last episode.
Yeah, I promised I won't bang on about Fallout 76 episode. I promised it I think it's one of the first time we've ever recorded an episode before the previous episode is released. So it's kind of nice to be able to do that. But yeah, that we'll have already released the 76 episode, obviously, by the time this comes out. So yep. I promise not to bang on about it, but I'm still really
I'm leaving it at that. I'm still playing it. I'm still enjoying the game despite all of its bugs. But that's the last thing I'm going to say about Fallout 76.
If you're playing the game and you don't like it, you're a stupid idiot. Let's move on.
Controversial topics, and we're not even 5 minutes into the video. Today we want to talk about actually a completely different set of games. One that I don't think we really talked about much at all. And that's Half-Life, because last week as of the time of this recording, it hit its 20th anniversary. And it was a pretty monumental game, like all things considered. It was the first game really developed by Valve. So Gabe Newell, and I didn't write down the other guy's name, left Microsoft to make video games. They licensed the Quake engine, and eventually we got Half-Life out of all of that. I think out of the stats I saw at this point, it has sold over 10 million copies between the original version, PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3. I think it was on Xbox 360. So 10 million copies in 10 years.
Unbelievable. In 20 years, but
still 20 years. Yeah.
Mike Harrington was the guy who founded Valve.
That's right.
And this is like Gary's patchy history of first-person shooters, because there were a few first-person shooters that became before this, but it was one of the very early ones in my memory. I know Quake had obviously come before it, because it used the Quake engine, but I don't know if Quake 2 had released. I doubt it.
No, Quake 2 was supposed to come out in 97, which Half-Life was supposed to come out at that time, but they
came out in 98, obviously, 20 years ago. So
yeah, and then I guess when they were getting ready to demo it and actually playtest it, it turns out it was actually a really boring game. So they scrapped the release and then spent a year reworking a bunch of the levels.
I mean, so Quake had dropped,
yeah.
Quake was obviously like the first, or in my mind, Quake was the first full 3D first-person shooter.
Yeah, because we'd had pseudo 3D games like Wolfenstein
Yeah.
3D and Doom.
Yeah.
But this was the first polygonal shooter.
And I think that Half-Life was the second, but I don't know that other more niche or less profitable or successful games didn't drop after Quake. It's the second one I can remember playing any amount of, because I played a ton of Quake. Quake was great, right? But Quake was this like really faster paced Doom style game, realistically, whereas Half-Life was a lot more cerebral with puzzles and a proper scripted story. You know, Quake had its story, but it really wasn't much of a story. It was just like,
I could not tell you what the story of Quake was.
I feel like you crash landed on an alien planet and you needed to get off it or something very unoriginal like that. Whereas Half-Life was massively story based. So I feel like it was the first ever first person shooter that really strived to have a beginning, a middle, and end story, 3 acts. You know, all the normal sort of tropes that we see in movies and in anything that's telling good stories has these things, and Half-Life really went all out for that kind of thing, which I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, it tried to tell a story as its main focus, and it was one of the very first games to actually use in-game cutscenes, which we take for granted now. Like, prior to that, if you had lots of things going on, a lot of that would be pre-rendered. But Half-Life has they set the engine up so that they could script it, and actually, like, if you enter a room and something needs to happen, boom, it happens seamlessly in-game. You're not taken out of the experience. And, I think that has definitely impacted games going forward, because now almost everything is in-game cutscenes. If you're dumped out to a pre-rendered scene, it just breaks the immersion so much.
You're right. I totally agree. Like, that was kind of groundbreaking. My main memories of that time, so I was lucky enough to pick up a copy of Half-Life like in 98. I guess I would have been 21. Jeez. And I bought my first ever PC. I was working, first kind of full-time job then, earning my own money, bought my own PC for gaming, and but obviously everything was software rendered. Quake was software rendered. It had there was no support for 3D cards because 3D graphics cards didn't exist.
We had Voodoo cards by that point, but you're still talking about it's like really highly specialized games.
Quake did not support 3D FX Voodoo 2s when it was released. You had to download a patch via very, very burgeoning internet over a dial-up modem for me. Yeah. So, but Half-Life came with 3D FX support out of the box. I don't know if it was the first game that came with 3D graphics card support out of the box, but I would be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
I know it wasn't the first game, because I'm pretty sure a lot of the Tomb Raiders had 3D effects out of the box, but
it was an early adopter of So I went out and bought a Voodoo 2 with my salary, and you could actually fit 2 Voodoo 2s, and they were PCI they were PCI cards then. They didn't have their own dedicated slot on the motherboard. You just plugged them into any PCI. So I bought 2 Voodoo 2s in the end and played Half-Life on its highest graphic setting with hardware rendering. And I mean, looking back on it now, it hasn't aged brilliantly, but at the time I was like, wow, this is the future of gaming right here.
Yeah, it has aged better, definitely better than things like Quake 2, which were contemporaries. But I mean, it doesn't. It has the blocky look of games of the late 90s. But I think a lot of that is offset by the story. Like, it's still a really, really fun game to play. Like, I'm not big on first-person shooters, but this doesn't play like Call of Duty and Battlefield. This plays much more like Fallout 4. I'm going to use that with better gunplay.
Drink. You said Fallout. Do we have to drink? Hang on.
But I didn't talk about the other one. But it plays much more like Fallout or Skyrim, where you it is a first-person perspective. You do have weapons, but you're not spending the whole time shooting things like that. You are shooting a lot of things, but there's the puzzle aspect, there's the story aspect, there's the exploration aspect. And I think for me, that still makes it a very fun game because you're not just spending all of your time running around shooting things.
Oh, and I totally agree. You know, exploration is a big part of it. Yeah, I mean, you might as well run through the story briefly. Seeing as you wrote all the bullet points in our show notes, that's behind the curtain for everyone.
I'm really good at cribbing notes from Wikipedia. Though in Half-Life's defense, most of the story is actually really, really memorable. I mostly just backed it up by making sure I was correct. So we don't remember the Quake storyline or Quake 2. But for Half-Life, basically you're a scientist that shows up at work. You're Gordon Freeman. And you are running some experiments. So you push a crystal into this anti-mass spectrometer, and you cause a cascade resonance, whatever the hell that actually means. Shit blows up.
It's amazing that I can still remember the words 20 years later. Like, I literally can remember the words. They're waiting for you, Gordon, down in the test chamber. You know,
you're late, Mr. Freeman.
You start this game with a unskippable 3-minute train ride into work. You know, it's so clever. It's so clever. Sorry, carry on.
Oh no. So then everything blows up. U.S. Marines are eventually sent in to help cover up the incident.
Oh, so the first thing there is that after everything blows up, aliens somehow have teleported into. I mean, that's just the crux of the entire story. I guess.
Aliens have invaded.
You gloss over that, you know. That's fine.
Aliens have invaded through the cascade resonance. So you're fighting things like there's the main aliens are called vortigaunts, and you've got head crabs. So we have the head crabs that have never gone away out of video games at this point.
Yeah.
So then you're fighting Marines and aliens and stuff as you go along. Turns out that aliens are trying to keep the rift open because there's another group of scientists trying to close the rift. So they teleport you to Zen, which is the alien homeworld. You fight the big bad alien, and then you are woken up by G-Man, and he says that you want to be employed, and you go off to sleep, and you end up with 2 more episodes after this.
3 actually, but that's fine.
Oh no!
Sorry,
Gordon's only got 2. He's got Half-Life. He's got Half-Life Episode 1 and Episode 2.
Half-Life 2.
Oh yeah, sorry. Half-Life 2, then Episode 1,
Episode 1, then Episode 2. Yeah,
yep.
It's 3 games for Half-Life 2. Anyway, we'll get on to that. I mean, it's the iconic. You kind of as the cascade resonance happens, you kind of pass out, Gordon Freeman, and you're in your HEV or environmental hazard suit. So that's kind of why you've managed to survive this, and why you've kind of, while everyone else is dying all around you, you've got the HEV. You can go and please go in here, Gordon, and turn this dials because I wouldn't be able to do it because I would die in that room. And then you walk out of the test chamber and find the iconic crowbar on the floor. So it's like, oh, I've got something to whack head crabs with now, which also keeps me alive. I mean, those are absolutely iconic moments in gaming for me. Like that crowbar, which is obviously called back to, and we'll come to that in the other Half-Life games. But that time where you first grab that crowbar and manage to start whacking head crabs with it is like, it's just an iconic moment for me, genuinely. I know that comes on strong, but it's like, for me, it's up there with my favorite moments in my favorite movies and that kind of thing. That moment for me is amazing.
Yeah, and I think it has to do a lot with the fact the game is paced very, very well. And despite Freeman being basically an everyman, he's a blank slate, he's a Mario. He doesn't talk. You never really see him in the game. He gets his magical suit, and then he gets his crowbar, and then he just does whatever he needs to do to get out. You do end up with some pretty fancy weapons along the way, but you always have your trusty crowbar and your HEV suit.
It's amazing. It really is. And it obviously won however many Game of the Years. It was the game of 98 without a shadow of a doubt. It was a massive deal. It's a massive deal in the history of gaming, like for me. Genuinely is. But The interesting thing was they released then Opposing Foes came out in 99, which was, I guess, DLC before downloads were available, so it was just sold in a box as another game. So,
before DLC, we had expansion packs.
Yeah.
But I feel like this isn't so much a.
Well, it was an expansion pack.
But you didn't have to have the original game, though, didn't you?
Did you or did you not? I can't remember. I mean, I bought Opposing Force. So Opposing Force was the same story, but told from the view of one of the Marines who came in to cover up the incident. So you start off, shooting scientists and vortigons and headcrabs, and then in the end it's like, oh my god, I still need to survive as well because the aliens are winning.
Because there's a scientist running around shooting all of us.
Yeah, so it's really interesting actually to see that same story, because the story obviously still holds up well in Opposing Force and in Blue Shift, which we'll come on to. But it's just again, it's an interesting. So this wasn't. I don't think this was made by Valve, though. I think.
I think it was Gearbox. I think it was just published by Valve, because at that point Valve had moved away from Sierra Studios, who published the original version. Because I think Sierra only ever did the first.
Well, they were getting heavily into Steam, weren't they? Because Counter-Strike was a mod for Half-Life, if I remember correctly. Yeah. Originally, Counter-Strike came out as a mod for Half-Life, so that goes to show a whole other genre of games was spawned from this game. You know, if you look at the fact that Counter-Strike spawned entirely its own genre of game. But anyway, that's a talk for another day. But this was really intriguing to play the same story. And to be fair, they didn't cheap on this. There were brand new levels, and there were some parts of the levels that you were seeing. Some parts of the levels you played through as Gordon, but you come in from different angles, and just before Gordon or just after he'd gone through, it was kind of clever. But they made whole new areas of the map for you to explore in Black Mesa, and there were a couple of new enemies, if I remember correctly, that we didn't see as Gordon. So it was a really, really good expansion. I really enjoyed it. Yeah,
I mean, I think it was. To me, like, it feels like it's a spin-off game, but it's not a cheap spin-off game. No. They, like you said, they put a lot of time and effort into actually making it a fun game.
And then there was a second sort of spin-off where they put Blue Shift, which is, again, playing through the same incident, but because
everybody loves Barney.
As a Black Mesa security guard called Barney. Yeah, very popular security guard, if, the little bits of reveal and lore you find in the world are to be proved. So, I mean, that was, again, you'd think, I've played through that story twice. But again, that angle was something completely new and fresh. And I really, really enjoyed that too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to the fact that Valve, when they get around to actually making a game, can make a really, really fun, engaging game. And the universe around Half-Life is incredibly interesting. No matter anything that they put out for Half-Life, sells like hotcakes, and that's not just because it's Valve, they made a video game. It's these games are really, really fun and enjoyable for lots of different people, even if you're not big into first-person shooters or you're not big into action games. A lot of people can find some sort of enjoyment in these games.
Absolutely, yeah. People can play through it on easy and still thoroughly enjoy it, even with without much of a challenge for the combat. It's still an amazing game. I totally agree.
Yeah,
I think, like, Opposing Force, I don't remember a lot of that game, if I'm perfectly honest. Like, I remember the original Half-Life. I still have nightmares about that massive fish monster that is in the water that you have to jump in and swim around him to get through.
Oh yeah.
Oh, geez, because, like, one bite and you're dead with him, so that, or her. But I don't remember a lot of Opposing Force. I remember lots about Blue Shift. Opposing Force is more of a vague memory for me than, I don't remember lots of specifics of that game.
Yeah, I never got around to actually playing Opposing Force or Blue Shift, so I can't comment to the actual mechanics of it. I've seen speedruns and stuff of it, which, are not indicative of the game itself. But no, I remember other people playing them, because, like, I never got into CSGO either, because back then my potato of a computer barely ran Half-Life. But yeah, but they were hugely popular back during their time.
Yeah, the original CS. Blue Shift is worth playing through. Like, if you've never played through Blue Shift and you find it, I mean, it's not a very long game, right? It's probably an afternoon by modern standards.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's cheap and you haven't played it, I would recommend playing through it. Genuinely, it was that good. And
all three of them are very highly regarded.
Agreed. And then we had a massive wait for Half-Life 2.
All the way until 2004.
It wasn't as long as... It feels like it was longer at the time.
That's because we weren't waiting on them like we are now.
It's... That 4 years or 5 years it's amazing how much 3D graphic engines came on in that time. Like, the difference between Half-Life 1 graphics and Half-Life 2 graphics is incredible. It's like chalk and cheese, really.
Well, and Half-Life 2 was one of the best looking games of that, 2004, 2005 as well. Because Valve put a lot of time and effort into making that engine run really, really well, but also still look really, really well. Because I remember because I got Half-Life 2 when it came out. That was one of the few 3D games that actually ran well on my PC. And it was not that great of a PC. I think it was still, might have still had, I think I had a low-end ATI card at that point. But it looked and ran really, really well, especially compared to a lot of the other stuff.
It's incredible. I mean, it holds up today. Half-Life 2 holds up massively better than, obviously, Half-Life 1. And they spent so much time on their engine, right? The physics model was probably like a revelation in gaming. Was it the first game that had, like, realistic physics engine built into it? I don't know. Was it the first game I remember playing that had that kind of... Was it the first mainstream game? Possibly.
I think so, because around that time you also had the PhysX card, which was an add-in card that you put in, and it would games could offload physics rendering to that. But I'm pretty sure Half-Life 2 was one of the most mainstream games that had a built-in physics engine that actually worked really, really well. And I mean, from there, there was a lot of technology that went into Half-Life 2 that was, I don't know, revolutionary for its time.
Without a doubt. So, Half-Life 2 is set 20 years after the Black Mesa incident in Half-Life 1, and the rift as kind of was closed in Half-Life 1, but the doorway between our worlds has been open once, so has obviously been open multiple times since, because the Combine, the alien forces, the alien race have invaded and control all of Earth. And it's a really, really intriguing start to the game, in the same way that Half-Life 1 had this intriguing start to the game. You start off in this Combine city, I can't remember, like City 19 or something, I don't know. I might be right there, I might be wrong, but... And then, it's really weird, There's these masked guards everywhere prodding people along with shock sticks to get them in queues, to get them onto trains to where they're going. It's almost this, like, 1984 Orwellian type city in my mind. It was like quite
it was future dystopian.
It's a very evoking intro into that world, though. It's another one of those moments in gaming where I can remember it now, and then you suddenly manage to break out of the queue when Barney escorts you into the, he's hiding as a guard, and he manages to get you into, out of the front areas and into the back areas, and he throws down your crowbar and says, "Come on, Gordon, we need your help." And it's like an awesome intro again into a game. Really special.
Yeah. So I guess the physics engine was Havoc. That's the reason I was trying to think, like, what exactly that was. Which the Havoc engine is still around. Like,
yeah. Oh, they spent so much time integrating that. The game was the puzzles and the whole game was based around the fact that they'd written this physics engine effectively, right? You know, puzzles.
No, Havoc is a totally separate company.
Okay, the fact that you're right. I shouldn't say written. The whole game was built around the fact that this physics engine existed in the game. So, for example, there's a seesaw, and you need to get the seesaw high enough so you can escape over a wall. Mm-hmm. Well, then you need to go looking for heavy objects and put enough weight on one end to get the seesaw to go up, you know? But there's multiple places in the game where the physics engine is ingrained into the puzzles heavily, you know?
Well, like the vehicles you can drive around, the vehicles feel really proper in this game because of all of the work they put into the physics engine. And getting tools like the launcher gun and picking up the saw blades and just launching them.
Yeah, with the gravity gun.
With the gravity gun. It feels really satisfying, and it looks proper when things are banging around on the screen. It's not just, it hits the wall and dies. Stuff's clattering around, and you can knock over piles of boxes, and it feels like a world that when you do stuff inside of it, it reacts.
Yeah, and as is traditional, the story and it would be easy to have a game where the gimmick is there's a realistic physics engine, and many games have been successful, particularly indie games, with just that sort of premise. It's a realistic physics game, but the fact is this is Half-Life, and so it had awesome gunplay as usual. It had amazing storytelling, amazing puzzles. Parts that made you laugh, parts that made you shit yourself, like Ravenholm. The scariest level I've ever played through, maybe aside from one of the levels in the original Alien vs. Predator. That level could have been in a Resident Evil game, Ravenholm, but there's other levels that are... Then you go from there to open space levels where you're driving your boat car thing, it's just great. There's parts of the level that are way out open and you're controlling the antlions, Then there's parts of the level where you're inside one of the combines, inside one of the combine citadels, where that's kind of enclosed and claustrophobic and scary in a different way. So it's so good game. I would, it stacks up brilliantly.
It gives you a good variety of environments, but the engine also makes it feel open and... expansive, like you said, something like the Citadel, that's a pretty enclosed place. And even a lot of the levels in Half-Life 1 were fairly intimate. You didn't have normally huge grandiose levels, where Half-Life 2, you'd walk outside and it felt like you were outside. There was a lot of stuff going on, especially in the beginning levels where you're walking around the city and trying to, get out. It feels big, like a city, like an actual city should.
Yeah, it was a fitting sequel to Half-Life, that's for sure. It was different enough to make it interesting, but it was familiar enough to make it, comfortable, and definitely the sequel. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. And then a couple of years later, we got Episode 1. So the naming of these games is really weird. We had Half-Life 2. And then Valve announced that they were going to do a trilogy of games on the Half-Life 2 engine, so they weren't really going to look to do Half-Life 3. They were going to just do a trilogy of games that continued the story of the events that happened in Half-Life 2.
Spoiler, they lied.
They did lie. The bastards. But, so we had Half-Life 2, then we had Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Half-Life 2 Episode 2, and Half-Life 2 Episode 3 is announced, but we've never seen it, and I highly doubt we ever will, but that's fine. I remember Half-Life 2 Episode 1. I remember the start of it where the big robot dog picks you're under a load of rubble and he pulls everything apart and you're right next to a citadel. But I don't remember, I remember a lot about the story of Half-Life 2, but I don't remember a lot about the story of Episode 1 or Episode 2.
No, I only played through them. So I got Half-Life 2 when it came out, and I played it quite a bit, playing the mods and stuff. But then Half-Life Episode 1 and Episode 2, I only played through once on Orange Box, because I got the PlayStation 3 had an orange box collection, which gave you Half-Life 2, Episode 1, Episode 2, and I feel like something else, but I don't remember.
It would have been...
Portal, it came with Portal.
Portal and Team Fortress 2 was the PC orange box. We'll come on to that.
And the more I think about it, I may not have actually played through Episode 2. I know I played through Episode 1, but I don't remember it being like as iconic or as memorable as Half-Life 2 itself was.
Episode 2, I feel like it started when you were in a wrecked train, but I don't really remember a lot more about it than that. And I remember the start of Episode 1. And I remember snatches of Episode 1. I probably should... This is probably a sign I could replay Episode 1 and Episode 2. Because I played Half-Life 2 not a long time ago, fairly recently, this year. But I haven't played the other episodes for ages. But more of the same, you know. They weren't... I don't know. I'm being a bit harsh when I say, like, because they came out just 2 years later and then 1 year later. So they were quite a quick turnaround.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were supposed to be... I mean, this was more of a traditional expansion pack at the time where we're going to... You know, you have the base game. You can buy essentially new levels and new things to do in the game.
Yeah, but I think they were completely separate games. I don't think they were sold as expansions. They were sold as a new game. So you didn't need to own Half-Life 2 to buy Episode 1 and Episode 2. Right,
but it was much more in the normal expansion pack vein, where it's not... It feels like an add-on to the game, as opposed to... Even though it is standalone.
I don't know. I wouldn't say they were disappointing, but I do feel a little disappointed.
I don't think they were iconic like the other...
I mean, let's put it this way. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 was the third best game released in the orange box, and that was the only way you could buy it on PC, was in the orange box. Mm-hmm. And the orange box consisted of Team Fortress 2, Portal, and Episode 2, and it was the worst game in that box.
Yes.
It turns out, like, I only bought the box for Half-Life 2 Episode 2, but I ended up putting many more hours into Portal and Team Fortress 2 than I did into Episode 2. So...
Yeah, and those things still hold its value. I'm looking at Steam right now. Orange box with Half-Life 2, Episode 1, Episode 2, Portal, and TF2 is still $20.
I paid £20 for it when I bought it in 2007. I paid £20. It was ridiculously cheap back in the day. Mm-hmm. Ridiculously cheap.
And now, comparatively, it's ridiculously expensive for how old the game is.
Yes, it is. It had Portal in it, and I've said many times that Portal 2 is my favourite game of all time.
Yeah. So Portal and Portal 2 are some of the best games ever created.
You know, it is what it is. And I guess then we sit and wait for Episode 3. Which is... It
is for me, it is regulated just to meme territory at this point. It's too late to do an Episode 3. I mean, Episode 2 came out in 2007. That was 11 years ago. And it's never going to live up to the hype that the world has given it.
I don't know if Valve even have a team that can make games in their company anymore.
They can barely keep Steam going, so... That's probably mean and unfair to anybody.
They make so much money. No, Steam is what Steam is their cash cow now, right? They're Valve are now a publisher of games, essentially.
Yeah, a very loose publisher because they really don't do anything at all. They're a platform company. That's what they do. Because I don't even think they stamp their name on games anymore, do they?
No, I don't. I think you're right.
I think they're at this point they are literally just a platform company. They're
a delivery mechanism. Yeah.
They're a delivery mechanism, and they make money hand over fist. I don't know how much money I have shoveled through Steam at this point, especially.
Please don't tell me. I don't want to
know. Which I mean is kind of sad because they did do a lot of great work, you know. And then on top of that, like we glossed over it, but they developed Steam, which was a steaming pile when it came out. Was a massively buggy DRM system when it first launched. But
let's see if my memory serves me correct. And I'd be interested to know if you or any of the listener can prove me wrong. But my memory says to me that the reason that they developed Steam was that they wanted a way to be able to update Counter-Strike effectively. Because keeping your version of Counter-Strike up to date was an absolute ball ache back in the day. You'd have to download the patch from somewhere, but on the day the patch came out, all of the download servers would inevitably go down, and then people would put fake patches up onto FTP sites so that you'd get loads of viruses on your machine, and the demand for getting those patches for days, like this bit is definitely true because I remember it. I remember we would if one of my friends got the patch, we would all like set up a LAN in the evening so that we could copy the patch around on network cables because of course pen drives didn't exist then.
Or you'd burn them to CDs.
We could burn them to CDs, but like getting hold of those patches in the first week was inevitably an absolute nightmare, and Counter-Strike was really suffering for it because they didn't want to release the patches because they didn't have the mechanism to deliver those patches. Now, don't forget, this is a pre-AWS day. This is pre-Steam. Steam was effectively a content delivery network built to deliver Counter-Strike, in my mind.
Yeah, because before that, you had one F-box running FTP that everybody logged into, either through a web browser or through an FTP client, and pulled it down at 56K speeds, and you just waited for that machine to melt, and then for someone to bring it back up. So I will congratulate you. That was actually the entire reason they made Steam.
I suspect. I mean, I've never actually checked that out. It's just in my mind the fact that I believe Valve bought Counter-Strike off the mod creators, right? I believe that happened. I believe that the initial Counter-Strike was a mod by a community of modders, of coders who just wanted to create this Counter-Strike experience, and they made it for Half-Life. There was already it wasn't an original concept. If we're going to go down the Counter-Strike route, there was already a game for the Unreal Tournament engine called something else that was terrorists against anti-terrorists, and you buy weapons at the beginning, which I played before I played Counter-Strike for a long time. And then this mod was like a rip of that mod, but for Counter-Strike, but for the Half-Life engine. And I believe Valve then bought it off the mod makers, because obviously it was massively popular, and Valve have never been anything except for very forward thinking. They could obviously see that Half-Life has a shelf life, no pun intended, or rhyme or whatever. It had a shelf life where people would stop buying copies of Half-Life, whereas if you've got this mod with a multiplayer content, people love to play multiplayer forever. So I'm guessing they could see the value there, and then they had to solve the problem of, well, how do we keep this damn multiplayer game up to date? Because cheating was such a big problem, and new maps and new content. How the hell are we going to keep this up to date? So for me, the fact that Valve bought Counter-Strike, there was a massive problem with keeping it up to date, and then they built Steam is ABC,
Yeah, because I mean, if you're selling a game like Counter-Strike, you can't have people not play for 3-4 days straight while you try to get them the patches.
Yeah,
because that causes a problem. People aren't going to want to buy that game if every time a patch comes out, you can't play it for a week.
And it's wholly acceptable if I've downloaded the patch for free because it's made by a modding community of people. It's wholly acceptable in those instances if I can't get hold of the patch for a few days because I haven't paid anything for it. Yeah. But when it's a paid game that I'm actually buying, then they need to have the delivery mechanism. Totally agree.
Because imagine PUBG if it was down, if you couldn't play for 3 days every time they came out with a patch just because Microsoft servers didn't get updated. I mean, it's a realistic problem. Nobody's going to buy that game if it's going to happen. So, they make Steam, and then on top of that, Steam added the ability to do matchmaking and all the other stuff that we were relying on things like GameSpy at the time.
Yes.
Third-party services to actually match you up. It's built into Steam, and everything worked well enough. I remember it being pretty crappy at the beginning. When it was mostly just Counter-Strike and the couple of Steam games, but
it was shit. But it was so much better.
So everything else was shit too.
But it was so much better than what it replaced. It was a million times better than what it replaced, and it was still terrible by today's standards. I totally agree. Like download speeds. Do you know what I love? I absolutely love about Steam is that I still now and again get prompted with the questionnaire that it's been prompting us with for probably 15 years, where it asks you about your connection speed.
Your PC speeds.
And it still says on it, like T1 and DSL.
ADSL.
And it's like, they've never updated those questionnaires, and I still get those questionnaires popping up now and again.
I'm pretty sure it still caps at 10 megabit cable.
It's brilliant. Because it is amazing.
I physically cannot buy less than 125 meg cable I'm at. And I'm in the middle of freaking nowhere. I can get 3 meg DSL, so...
I'm on 50 meg, right? That's the fastest I can get, but we don't have fibre to the estate I live on. So, it is what it is. It's over copper wire, so still pretty good. But yeah, 10 meg of the day. God, that was like a pipe dream. When I used to see that option, I was like, nobody has that T1 line or whatever it was called.
I remember how happy I was when we got a 512K DSL.
Oh God, yeah, I got a cable modem with 512.
And then we ran network cable through the house, and it's like, this is awesome.
Yeah, that was just to play Counter-Strike. To be honest, I got my first cable hookup. Like I used to take my PC to my mate's house, who was the only one we knew who had cable modem. I managed to figure out how to share the connection through Windows connection sharing.
Connection sharing, yeah.
And then we were like, I wonder if you'll be able to play 2 people over this 512 connection. And I'm like, of course you can. It's like 10 times faster than my modem was before. My dial-up modem. Oh, it was amazing. And look, we're going off topic, but we can finish. But like having a low ping was a guaranteed win in Counter-Strike. Like, if you were pinging about 30, everybody else would have been pinging about 120. You were pretty much guaranteed to shoot them before they shot you, right? Because ping was a massive deal. So that was really good fun.
now it's all about the refresh rate.
Well, to be fair, ping has become
irrelevant.
A non-issue because everybody's got such a good connection, right? It can still be a small problem.
Unless you're Ninja, and then he just complains if he gets more than, like a 50 millisecond ping, and then he just cries.
Yeah, Dr. Disrespect's moaning about it at the moment. He keeps getting put on East Coast servers instead of West Coast servers or whatever. And, my ping's 90. And I'm like, yeah, actually, 90 does sound quite high. But I used to play with 210 Counter-Strike, so,
I'm under 300? Yes!
Exactly. Yeah, that is true. Anyway.
Yeah, so... Yeah, so... Half-Life, I think, is probably one of the most influential games of all time. It may be one of the best games of all time. I think both of us can probably agree on that on the original Half-Life.
I wouldn't like to pick which one it is, but one of those games would be in my top 10. Like 100%, one of those games would be my top 5. I don't know which one I'd have to pick. It would be hard. I mean, let's be honest, it would either be 1 or 2. There's no way it would be any of the...
I would go with 2 just because of the quality of life things it did with it. Without Half-Life, I don't think we would have the first-person landscape that we would have today.
No, I totally agree.
So, well, thank you, Gary. I'm sure our listeners are happy we didn't talk about that other game. But thank you for getting together and talking about a game that I really love.
Sorry. I'm going to just go and look for some desk fans after we finish here, so it's all good.
Not for screws, though. But yeah, so if you want to follow Gary on Twitter, you can find him at Geeh. You can find me online as Dragon Man Tank just about anywhere. We mentioned at the top of the show, but if you want to watch me play some games, I'm at twitch.tv/DragonManTank. You can follow the podcast itself at Jerks Talk Games on Twitter, and as always, you can find the audio, the video, and some show notes over on jerkstalkgames.com, and you can find us wherever fine podcasts can be downloaded. If you like this episode, leave a review and stuff on whatever podcast app you're using. That's the best way to help us. But again, thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Chris.
Hope you have a good rest of the day, and everybody else, don't forget to save your game.